Hey, welcome to my talk, the Pygmy Stack, the little Docker helper tool that could. On today's agenda for this lightning talk, I want to talk about the history of the Pygmy project. We want to go into some design decisions uh, and the maintenance part that it's had because it is a story worth telling. I'm Karl, and I'm a platform engineer at Amazing, and I help look after the infrastructure that Lagoon sits upon. And I'm also the writer of the Pygmy project as it is today. A lot of people come into, or they discover Pygmy and they go, why would I use that? So let's cover that first. Uh, it actually makes a lot of historical context, it makes sense historically if you look at the history of the project over time. However, today it provides a very low barrier of entry experience for a local development experience, which provides DNS and reusable containers. So you can add multiple projects to a Docker network, give yourself a consistent experience, and ultimately you could use less containers as a result. The rewrite of the project actually provides a lot more customizability, but a lot of people don't know, care, or make use of that. That's one of the driving goals I had with it. Um, well, why? Yeah, okay, sorry. That was why. What is It's a series of containers that make up the product that is Pygmy Stack. And the Pygmy CLI is the part that I'm responsible for that manages those containers. It generates a series of structures and posts them or manages them using the Docker API. That's essentially what it does. But it does that in order to provide a development experience that is simplified, opinionated. To some degree, it still provides you full flexibility. One of the key points about it I still enjoy is that it doesn't have any strong opinions about how you run your application, and you can still use production containers in local development, which is something I really do feel has been lost with competitors, and that's fine. You can use what you want, but it still gives you that option. So we've covered a lot of this already. How about we move to the next one? The situation before Pygmy was there was no Docker desktop for Mac. This was kind of a problem at Amazy Labs, uh, which is the company which Amazy spawned out of originally. So they needed a product for local development on Mac. Docker was clearly superior at the time. So what they did was they went to market and they just found what was on the market. We actually found a product called Dingy, which I'll talk about shortly. But the experience, it didn't always translate from your local to production. We sort of needed Docker to help this along. And if you were to implement DNS locally, if you were to do all the sophisticated stuff, how can your dev team manage this long term? How can they maintain it, sustain it, and how can they make sure new people are on the same level? So it was a bit technical for newcomers, for people to get involved with that process. Looking at the history, we started with Dingy in 2014, as the Git commit history has told me. But out of it, we spawned Cachalot and then onto Pygmy. And these are the things I'll be going into next. So at Amazy, there was a Vagrant-based system using Puppet. This had issues with time, with, again, maintenance, which being a thing. But what it did was it provided a consistent development experience for developers at the team. And at the time, Docker was gaining traction, but not in use. Looking towards the adoption of Dingy, it provided a adequate experience. It has actually evolved to solve a lot of the issues Docker has, but as of late last year, it actually got archived publicly. So there's still not a lot of use for it, but it's an important part of that journey. Cachalot came about in 2016 as a fork from Dingy, interestingly. Amazy ditched a few features and added a few of their own, but they basically made it their own product in order to facilitate, dev teams. The name Cachalot is actually a sperm whale, so it's a very Docker-centric name, and it comes from this big behemoth thing that you can run locally. Chandeep actually has a very good blog post up there if you want to check that out to see what it looks like. I have tried running that as part of preparation, and using old Ruby and Python projects can be problematic at times. I haven't got this done. So, moving on to Pygmy. Almost. Dory was a CLI tool which, if you're familiar with Pygmy, you will probably recognize a lot of the design patterns here. So, Dory was basically the blueprint for Pygmy, which was made to support Dinghy at the time. Around this time, our friends at Amazing, either Mike or Basti, they noticed this and had a similar thought. Why don't we take this thing, make it our own, we can make it support Cachalot, and we can go from there. So that's the path that was taken. All the way down, we have Pygmy in 2016, and that was basically a version of Dory which is made for us, stripped out all of the things we didn't need, and it was made Dockerized, so it didn't matter where you ran it now. There was no overhead, it was really quick to run, and you can still have all of the benefits that Pygmy provided, and Bob's your uncle, essentially. It was a nice, clean experience for those that needed something of that nature. In 2019, I was at the Department of Finance in Canberra, and I had a few frustrations with the project. There was a lack of appetite for change, which was understandable in its structure. And I wanted to add things, I wanted to change things, as I guess you could say any newbie would want to. But what I resulted in was rewriting the project, and the first case was do exactly the same thing, look exactly the same, and that was my starting point. But I did reach a point where I didn't feel it would go anywhere else. I was going to get rid of it essentially at one point. But a friend of mine and now a colleague has actually convinced me to maybe you shouldn't do it, pursue it, open source it. And it eventually became adopted as a first-party service by Amazing. So the frustrations I had with the project included customizability, things that I wanted to change, add, remove, all that sort of jazz. That's how all of this came about. In January 2022, I was at Previous Next, and I did a project handover. And at the time, Amazing gave me the... when the project was handed over, Amazing gave me independent ownership to develop and continue to mature the project over time. They have trusted me with a very good testing suite. So the project is tested end to end. Changes are very easy to come by as long as those tests pass, and that has been a real benefit to the project over time. But in 2022, out spawned the Pygmy Stack, a new namespace on GitHub, and all those containers, all the maintenance moved to that namespace, and I let go of the project in my personal namespace. And since it's been sort of an ongoing maintenance. Design decisions. So, as I said before, you can generate a bunch of objects that send directly to the Docker API. That was the fun bit of Docker, the Pygmy, but no one used it that way. But it is also now possible to support things that aren't Docker. Like I have a almost working version of Podman locally, which nobody else saw, mind you. But I wanted to see if it could be done, and I made a lot of optimizations along the way. And we are almost at the point where we're removing hard coding. There's another thing I'll be discussing in a sec that might cover a bit of that. But maintenance, I guess the biggest challenge over time, working at technically a competitor to finance and Amazing, people don't submit issues, they don't ask for help, and even if I'm in a position to help them, it still happens that way. So I ask that if you have an issue, raise it. I'm more than willing to spend my own personal time to fix them if I can replicate them, and the only way I can do that is if you tell me. Speaking of maintenance, over the life of finance, Previous Next, and even Amazing now, support has been ongoing on a, I guess you could say, a personal level. But I haven't been hindered by any of those parties, even though we all coexist and we all do different things. But the sort of layer that allows me to provide support to customers, to people in the community, and even whoever comes along, really. I've always had the chance to do that, and even including through some interesting DNS issues that are ongoing, which I haven't been able to replicate. So maintenance is an interesting position for that reason. But future work. Like I said before, it can now almost support Podman, so if anyone really has a use case for that, it's a thing. It's a bit of a rewrite inside of the same project, so it's sort of code execution just spanning out. The APIs are quite different, which is why that happens that way. But what I see is useful. I've had a few requests in the community, and I've had a few frustrations with, say, the documentation, which is a problem in its own. But adding an SSH key in configuration seems to be a bit of a problem, which we've now got an issue for, and someone has elected to look at it. So expanding on the configuration system to not expose everyone to this enormous config that is currently there, to just have a little piecemeal thing that can be interacted using the CLI, which is kind of where that goes. And SSH keys are a part of that. So my goal today was to try and teach you something about the history of the project, to try and make sense of why it's still around. And to that flow, it's the little Docker helper tool that could. Amazy, their tagline was the little Docker helper tool by Amazy.io. And to the story, the childhood story, it just keeps chugging along despite all of the things that happen around it. And here we are. I hope you've learned something. If you have any questions, I'm obviously floating about everywhere, but I'm more than happy to come and talk to you about this. Thank you very much.